Jewish history, at least the calendar, is famously punctuated by a period in time known as the 3 weeks. The 3 weeks, of course, precede the great rabbinic fast day of Tisha B'Av, the 9th day of Av, the only rabbinic fast that runs for 25 hours. The only other fast in the Jewish tradition that runs for 25 hours is very well known to you. That's called Yom Kippur. But all the other rabbinic fasts, of which there are a number of them, by the way, they are sunrise to sunset. That's the totality of the fast days, with the exception of Tisha B'Av. Tisha B'Av, we know, commemorates and marks the destruction, most notably of a number of historical events, but most notably of the first and second temples. Those 3 weeks, interestingly enough, are counterbalanced in the Jewish calendar and in rabbinic thought by what they call the 7 weeks of consolation. That is, that the 7 haftarot, the 7 weeks that follow Tisha B'Av, the 9th day of Av, the fast day, are called the 7 weeks of consolation. And if you look at the readings from the haftarot of each of those 7 weeks, you see that there are messages very much of consolation. If the 3 weeks before of those are dark and desolate images, the 7 weeks afterwards, well, if the 3 weeks earlier are black and white, this is technicolor, okay? So it's meant to give a little bit of hope. The moment that actually kicks off this period of 7 weeks is not just after Tisha B'Av, but it's this interesting holiday called Tu B'Av. Tu B'Av, or the 15th day of Av, jokingly commented in Jewish tradition as being Jewish Valentine's Day or Jewish Sadie Hawkins Day, is the great moment where people are matched up. In Jewish tradition, the single men and single women would go into the fields and they would mingle, and certainly at that time, people of the opposite sexes didn't have opportunities to meet each other freely, and so this was an opportunity to do it. And the message of Tu B'Av is a message of rebuilding. That in the face of the destruction of the temple, that we build families, we build homes, we move on, and we rebuild. When you look at rabbinic tradition, they say that the reason why the first temple was destroyed was because of avodat elilim, or avodat zarah, that idol worship. And if you look at tradition, they say that the reason why the second temple was destroyed was because of sinat chinam, was because of acrimony and rancor amongst other human beings. But the truth is, if you look at the history, not the rabbinic interpretations of these historical events, if you look at the history, there's actually, I think, a deeper lesson to be found. And as the old saying goes, history is a teacher, but we are poor students. And so the challenge for us this morning is maybe to think of becoming better students, myself included. When you look at the actual history of the destruction of the first temple and the second temple, they share a common thread. The common thread is that the reason and how and means that the Jews led themselves to the brink of catastrophic destruction was because of our inability to get along with each other. Now, I understand, as the old joke goes, and you've heard it dozens of times, you know about the old, there's a group of Jews sitting at a dinner table, and the waiter comes over at the end of the meal, and he drops the check off, and he says, "Was anything good?" And that the other argument, or the other flip side of this joke, is the idea that if you have 2 Jews, how many opinions do you have? Right. Or this joke about the Jew who's living on a deserted desert island, how many shuls does he have? 2. The one that he goes to and the one that he'll never go to. I understand that Jews are inherently driven to disagreement, differing opinions. I understand that. But on the other hand, if the lessons of the first 2 temples are to be understood and heard, then we have to think about how we can carry conversations amongst ourselves to avoid another reality. And that is, in modern Jewish language, in Israeli modern Hebrew literature, the first 2 temples are referred to as the Bayit Rishon, the Bayit Sheni, but the state of Israel is referred to as the Bayit Shlishi, the third temple, the third sanctuary. If the first two of them collapsed and were destroyed because Jews could not get along with each other, how do we prevent the failure of the third? And if I can say that our existence outside of Israel, which has become incredibly apparent to us, if it wasn't before, over this past year, how our safety, our security, our confidence is deeply tied to the safety and confidence and security of the state of Israel. Because if it should fall under, we are deeply imperiled. So how can we go about having disagreements and conversations in a world of differing opinions in the way that could best project the way that we could have a Jewish conversation about it? A Jewish conversation that's not a conversation that is focused or thinking about how it carries on in humor and in jokes, but in a serious way. So it's interesting to note that the Talmud, which is the great book of rabbinic Judaism, and for the record, you should know that you are rabbinic Jews and not biblical Jews. If you want to visit biblical Jews, go and visit Samaritan communities, particularly in the along the West Bank in Israel. There are a few Samaritan and Karaite communities, actually, I think in Chicago and in New York. They are roughly biblical Jews, but you're rabbinic Jews. And it should be noted that the great book of rabbinic Judaism is the Talmud, of which there are 63 volumes. There are 5 million words. And it was completed roughly 1,000 years ago. About 500 years ago, there was a rabbi, a great rabbi, a Sephardic Spanish rabbi by the name of Rabbi Joseph Caro, who in 1492 decided, yes, an auspicious year as well, in 1492 decided that to master the Talmud as a way of being able to understand all the things that you needed to do in its proper time and way, that it was far too voluminous. So what did he do? He wrote something called the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law, of which there are 5 volumes. So as one of my teachers, the great theologian Leibovich, once said, how do you go from 63 volumes to 5 volumes? How does that happen? I'm pausing thinking that you might jump into this. How does that happen? What you end up doing is that you eliminate all of the discussions. It simply becomes you do this then, and you do this now, and you don't do this and you do that. It becomes a bullet point instruction manual about the things you do and the things that you don't do. And yes, there are different opinions that are brought down as well, but by and large, the way that you go from 63 to 5 volumes is by a massive, massive reduction in the verbiage, in the words, in the discussion. And accordingly, you could well imagine that that portends very badly for the next 500 years of Jewish history. That we have become more hardened in our silos, more unwilling to listen to people we don't agree with. We only tune into the TV channels and read the books or the newspapers that we think agree with us, which is a terrible mistake. The philosopher John Dewey once said that when you listen to people talk, most people, I know not you, but most people, as someone is talking, what are they focused on? Thinking about how they're wrong. But Dewey said, when you listen to someone talk, think about how they might be right. When you have a favorite newspaper, try to read a newspaper that you don't agree with. When there are positions in the Jewish world that you don't agree with, that you think are abhorrent or repugnant or repellent, of which I can say, sadly, there's not a terrible shortage of, it's important to think about how they see things. Not to demonize. Yes, to disagree, but not to demonize. And while this kind of reductionist attitude is true in the Jewish world, it is also very true of the greater world that we live in. Social media, the internet have all contributed greatly to people hardening the silos of what they listen to. That you can now choose the opinions that you want to listen to. You choose your podcasts, you choose your newspapers, you choose your radio stations. You get to choose what you listen to. And in fairness, while I understand it, because everyone likes to listen to things they already agree with, that doesn't make you grow as a human being. In Jewish tradition, in the Talmud, there is a solution to this problem, by the way. It involves two rabbinic characters that you know very well, and they are foundational in the story of modern Jewish life. They are the great rabbinic schools of Hillel and Shammai. The stories of Hillel and Shammai are felt by Jews everywhere in the world, that their disagreements and arguments, that they color the observances of Jewish life. For example, in the observance of Hanukkah, Shammai said that you start off with 8 candles and you take one off each day, and then Hillel said, no, you start with one and you add them on. The reasoning behind this we're not going to go into, but you can see that their ideas and disagreements run deep into the well of Jewish life. And so their disagreements are world famous. They never seldom agreed with each other on anything. And yet the Talmud famously points out that the tractate of Eruvin points out that with the exception of 5 decisions, with the exception of but 5, Jewish life always ruled in favor of Hillel. Always. And the Talmud goes and asks why. Because, as the Talmud famously says, Elu ve'elu divrei Elohim chaim, that both of them are speaking words of Torah. So the Talmud goes to explain is that the reason why Hillel was chosen as the de facto default position of decisions in Jewish life was because in the yeshiva, in the academy of Hillel, they would teach the opinions of Shammai first, and only then would they offer their own opinions. In other words, the story of Jewish disagreement and of Jewish conversation is not the story about which side is right. It's a story about which side is prepared to listen. We should all be blessed with the strength to listen. Shabbat shalom. Everyone, please.